Hi, from the Greenberg Studios right here in our den, broadcasting only to one place, and that's your place. This is Andy Greenberg with...
I'm Carol.
And we are about to really get involved in a terrific discussion that'll be mind-boggling, that'll be somewhat inspirational, and that will communicate some wonderful ideas. And of course, as always, I do need to put my disclaimer in. Carol, how much of tonight's discussion, or today's discussion, are you aware of? Zero. Have I given you any information at all?
None at all. Even though I probed, none at all.
She tried everything she possibly could, but I wanted her to represent you because this will be the first time that you've ever heard what we were going to be talking about. So let's get to it. And the operative word today is communicate. Now, watch this. Carol, what does communicate mean?
It's to speak to someone clearly so they understand you.
Speak to someone clearly so they understand you.
Or make your ideas known.
Or make your ideas known. Okay, now we're getting somewhere. So the whole speaking thing about communication, I hate to tell you this, is wrong.
Really?
Yeah, which I'm glad you went ahead and corrected yourself.
Okay.
Because communication is not only limited to the spoken word. So what other ways are there to communicate?
Visual communication.
Visual communication, such as?
Seeing something in print.
Seeing something in print? Okay, good.
And understanding it.
Seeing something in print and understanding it. Good. What else? How else do you communicate?
The visual, the written word, the spoken word.
Yes, yes.
You're watching TV.
Yeah, okay, good,
You're listening to the radio. You're listening to music. You go to a play. You interpret it.
Well, you're really getting there, but you're leaving a lot out.
I am.
So what do you think she's leaving out? A whole host of ways to communicate. By the way, you said...
Touch, feel, think.
I wasn't going to go to touch and feel, but... Yep, all right, I'll take that. It wasn't part of what I was going to talk about, but I'll go with that. Good, what else? When you communicate, what are you communicating?
You're communicating what your feelings, your ideas, your command, your directive, your job, your explanations.
You're getting there. So how about this? I'm surprised you didn't mention this. Does art communicate?
Of course.
Well, you didn't say that.
Well, I wasn't going there because, everything communicates.
So when you talk, so what we're going to do today, we're going to be talking about communications, but we're going to talk about the different ways and basically the history of communications and some of the timetables and how it has impacted our society, believe it or not, and how it has affected and impacted your society. And when you go to the end of this whole discussion, you'll really be amazed about some of the things you're about to learn. So hang in there to the end while we communicate with you some of these ideas. So what do you think one of the first ways of communication was, going way back to medieval
Writing the
times?
walls in the caves.
Even before that?
Even before that. Gestures,
because remember, and we did this a long time ago when we talked about body language, which I'm not going to repeat. We talked about people grunting, right? Because they didn't have the spoken language. Ba ba boo, right? I don't know the language, but you know what's odd? There was only one grunt language. I did some research. Did you see anything anytime about Italian grunts? Did you see anything about French grunts, Chinese grunts? Believe it or not, the entire world spoke one language of grunts. Yeah, that's it. And it wasn't even separated by gender. Ever think of that? All right, so let's move on. So with the grunts, what then came? Then came the body language or the pointing. I'm hungry. Oh, I love. Basically a little bit of sign language, but, oh, yeah, I'm in trouble. Oh, what was that movie when this kid went like that?
Yeah, hurt.
Yeah, oh, that's right. And by the way, when you communicated in those days, how many people were you able to impact during those communications?
Only the person that you...
Pretty much. Only the person that was there with you in the cave or in your general area. But you could not communicate to the entire world. And what you normally communicated, by the way, was your needs and wants. Would you agree with that?
I would.
Did you try and influence anybody? No. Did you try and convince anybody? No. So we probably never thought of that. But then what occurred? People really wanted to get their feelings out or send messages to other people. Well, first of all, they had to develop a language, right? And then people began to talk. And when they began to talk, and I know I'm being a little bit elementary, but just bear with me, they began to talk one to the other, and that was basically the only way to communicate. But how would you then communicate to people that lived in a different town or a different city?
Yell.
Yell, okay, yell, and this is before writing, yell. Yeah, but how far would your yelling go?
Not very far.
Not very far. Do you know that one of the ways people communicated way back when? Smoke signals.
Smoke signals, okay.
Yeah, oh, you never heard of the smoke signals?
I did.
Yeah.
It's like what do you call it? Morse code.
Sort of, yes,
Morse
sort of.
code.
But you know the interesting thing about smoke signals, this is kind of cool, I think. So watch this, this is kind of crazy. So let's say somebody wanted to communicate to somebody else by smoke signals, right? Which they did. So you have the guy doing the smoke signals, or gal. You have the person doing the smoke signals, right? And they never met the other person, let's assume on the other side of town. How did the other person know how to interpret the smoke signal?
I have no clue. I was just thinking the same thing. I don't know.
Yeah, you have to think
Oh,
about
that
that.
looks like a circle. Oh, I don't know.
You didn't know, so you really had to send a human to the other town and say, okay, we're going to send you a message, and the message on the smoke signal is going to mean this, that, and the other. Otherwise, they wouldn't have known. And guess what?
What?
That language of smoke signal went from city to city to city, which in fact was the way of communication. And so you didn't know this stuff,
No.
right? No,
Sounds
interesting.
like berserk.
What, berserk? What do you mean by berserk?
I can't imagine. I'm just trying to envision smoke signals going up.
Uh-huh.
I mean, so somebody has to fan it the same way exactly to get the same kind of smoke signal.
That's right. Can you imagine a person getting an education in smoke signals? Right? Wow.
Have a diploma. I graduated from smoke school.
Okay. You're right. You're right. And you know, she is right. So you go to a town, right? And you say, hi, I'm your smoke signal representative from AT&T Smoke Signals, right? You got to have some kind of credibility. You're a technician. Now, here's something else you didn't think of.
What?
Right? Watch this. You people didn't think of this either. And I'm not crazy, but just bear with me. So let's assume you wanted to send a signal to another town, and you wanted to do the smoke signals. Did you have to take into consideration
The air, the wind,
The wind.
the air, how hot it was, if it was raining or whatever.
Yeah, so
The weather.
it's the
The
weather,
weather.
right? What happens if it was a cloudy day, right? What happens if there was something you really had to tell somebody in another town, and all of a sudden you did the smoke signal, and by the time they saw the smoke signal, the thing dissipated because the wind blew. You never thought about these problems,
Never
did
thought
you?
about that.
But they're there.
Very
All right,
good.
so they did the smoke signals, and obviously they had those problems, right?
Right.
So then how else would you communicate? Well, you'd have one rider going to another place, and then, of course, as Carol said earlier, you could use art, right? You could also write and scribble on the walls. You can scribble on the rocks, and you can start to communicate. Now, remember, I'm not talking about communication here. I'm talking about communications with other people. And that becomes something that has really changed their society. Why? Because all of a sudden, when you start getting that communication, you get involved with culture changes, right? You get to meet other people, other ideas from other towns, maybe share some of their inventions, and maybe you had an invention that you shared with them. All right, let's kind of move up a little bit in time. So what do you think came up after smoke signals? Because that probably didn't last very time. And messengers. You know, people running around from town to town talking. What
I'm
do you
trying
think?
to think. After smoke signals and the writing on the wall, maybe the Morse code?
Morse code? No, that came
No,
way.
I don't know.
How about the first written book?
Oh, the
Right?
first written book.
The first written book. And I actually did some research, as I do on everything we talk about.
Well,
And
we know
believe-
people read.
Well-
Understood how to read.
Oh, the languages and stuff. That's a very good part. So they had the languages and the alphabet. So there was a book called the Diamond Sutra, Sutra. not the Kama Sutra. Don't start getting these weird thoughts on me. The Diamond Sutra, which was a Buddhist book that was first printed in a town called Donghung, China. Did I pronounce that right? Around 868 AD during the Tang Dynasty. And it is said to be the oldest known printed book. The Diamond Sutra was created with a method using something known as block printing, and it utilized panels of hand-carved wood blocks in reverse.
Actually, that's how they used to print the newspapers, with block print of each letter.
Now, your dad was in the newspaper business.
He was a linotyper.
Expand on that.
Yeah. So he, when they actually put the paper together, it was almost like alphabet stamp that you would put in, you would correct the words, and you would put it in a machine, and it would just print everything. So that's very interesting with the block print.
Yeah.
I'm trying to envision it. So, but the block print is usually three-dimensional.
Right.
So this was a book. So they used the block print to print on the book.
Yeah. Now remember too, by that time you did have the alphabet, as Carol pointed out, because people could write at home, right? They could write on letters, so to speak, and have them delivered to somebody else. So the alphabet already existed, but never in a book form. Now, once books were published, guess what that improved?
When books were published,
Yeah. How did that impact society when books were finally published?
People read it. People couldn't wait to read books.
Yeah, but what kind of books did they read? In other words, what were some of the books that were out there? Well, watch this. Educational books, right?
How to do books.
How to do books, right? Books for dummies. You ever see that yellow book? I'm kidding. But books for dummies. But cookbook. I don't know. Cookbooks and recipes. So you see how that changed society? So all of a sudden you had the book. Now, it took time to write those books based on this particular method. But all of a sudden the whole method of communication stopped from just mouthing, from grunting, and from sign language or body language. Now it communicated to the written form. And if you duplicated the book, you could have more than one book, which meant what? It reached more than
one person.
How about that? See,
that?
what I want to point out is how communications have changed people. And as we go through each society also, and as we go through each one of these steps, you'll see that really being amazing. So now people were communicating by books, and that, of course, enhanced education. And when you enhance education, what else comes along with it? Knowledge. Right?
Invention.
And knowledge and inventions and recording of history and recording of formulas. And obviously the printed book process began to develop and evolve into something more modern as it is today. Now, I do want to talk about something else. And that is, I'm going to fast forward to 1712. 1712. 1712 changed dramatically the way people communicated with each other. Because guess what? Prior to 1712, there was no post office. I don't know when you thought the original post office was developed, but it was developed in 1712 in a town called St. Croix, Dumfries, and Galloway. And they... Actually, that's in, I believe it was Germany, and, I'm sorry, Sweden, scratch that, Sweden, and Stockholm, Sweden, let me get recalibrated. And by the way, that post office still exists today, and it is still run by two folks who still distribute letters.
Yeah, but that must have taken a long time to get a letter from one place to the next.
You mean like today?
Like today.
Okay.
Well, yeah, we're reverting, but
I'm back.
Sure it took weeks to get one thing, or months.
Right. Now let's talk about the impact on society. Let's really think about this. Once you were able to have a post office, how do you think that might have changed society?
Once you were able to have what?
A post office where you can send letters out.
So people actually wrote a letter,
right,
wrote something down and mailed it. But,
right.
But if they needed an answer right away, they would
get it. No, absolutely not. But here's probably what happened. Let's assume, for example, you lived, remember the old days? Well, older than any one of us. But you had families that were born together, and then what did they do?
They moved away.
No.
They lived
Prior
together.
to the post office.
Prior to the post office,
Yeah.
they were all in the
They were
same-
all in the same area. Why? Because that was the only way they could communicate with each other. Now, very few people in those days relocated. You were born in the town and you died in the town.
Unless you all moved together.
Unless
to
you all
another
moved
town.
together. So the nuclear family, to Carol's point, always stood together. And we know that from history. And it was a heritage, it was a nucleus, it was family, it was values,
Yes,
it was
but it was
ethics.
fear of the unknown, like where we're moving to, because that's all they knew.
Yet not only fear of the unknown and the comfort level, the comfort zone that you're talking about, but if somebody did move, didn't you want to keep in touch with them to see how they're doing? Are you going to get on your horse and buggy? No. But after the whole post office really matured and developed, you could write a letter and send it basically to anywhere in the world, as long as other post offices were there. See, you probably never thought about the outcomes of each one of these advances in the art of communication. And that changed society. And of course, it allowed people to expand their thought processes and move because they knew they could always keep in touch. All right.
So the word, the post office came from posting a letter.
Right. Exactly. Ooh.
Posting a letter.
Very close. Very close.
Right.
Posting a letter. So, how about America? Do you know who was the first postmaster general in the United States?
I do
And
not.
it's a rhetorical question. I wouldn't expect anybody to know because
No.
I didn't until I looked it up.
No.
Ready for this? None other than Benjamin Franklin.
Really?
Yes. See, you didn't know that.
Wow.
Yep.
He was a jack of all trades then.
Yep. In early America, post offices were known as stations. And this term and post house fell from use as the horse and coach service was replaced by railways, aircraft, and automobiles. But it was originally done by Benjamin Franklin. Making sure that the mail was delivered as quickly and independently as possible was critical to the United States colonial survival. That's why 3 months after the Battle of Lexington, which means prior to the Battle of Lexington and Concord, there was none, the Continental Congress turned to Benjamin Franklin to establish the National Post Service as the first Postmaster General.
Wow.
So I want you to imagine this, right? Would the settlers have moved to the United States if there was no post office developed around 1712? No, there was no post office, which means they did, which meant that they lost contact with their family. And it was probably very difficult for people in Europe or people in England when people moved here in the 1600s. What's doing with the family? Yeah, maybe they wrote a letter, got it put on a boat, somebody on the other side took that letter and delivered it to somebody, gosh knows what. But that was it. Was there any voice that people could talk to each other? Everything was in the written word. Now, let me also go back a little bit because I did talk about art. So art was also a great way of communication because guess what? There were no photographs, which we didn't mention before either. Isn't photographs?
Yeah, absolutely. A picture is worth 1,000 words.
It is. But without art, with art I should say, and without photographs, people were not able to show a picture of what mom and the kids look like. So what did they probably do?
They painted
They
it.
drew it, painted it, and sent it along, and painted history. As when we go to the museums, we see all the paintings of all the old buildings. Believe it or not, I bet you never considered that. That is part of the art of communication. And again,
No play on words.
No
The
play on
art
words.
Of communication.
yes, I didn't do that on purpose, but nice catch.
Yeah.
Beautiful catch. So, what did we need next? Aha, what was after that? We needed, well, let me ask you this question. Here's a good one. What came first, the telegraph or the telephone?
The telegraph.
The telegraph came first. Why do you say that?
It just makes sense that the telegraph came first.
Ah, so let's work with that.
No, it didn't.
Well, wait a minute. What did the telegraph need in order to work? What did it
A
need?
telephone.
No, just a
I
telephone.
need
You know,
yeah,
what did it need?
You need electric, Morse code.
How about a wire?
A wire.
right?
Oh,
so
so then-
telegraphs were always transmitted by wire, right? There was no radio in those days,
Right.
right?
Right.
So the wire technology actually came a year earlier because the telephone was invented before
With the telegraph.
the telegraph. Ah, very
But
good.
it sounds like when you think about telegraph, you think of something so old.
Yeah, I know.
And then you think of the telephone as very modern.
Right. So, again, nobody would know this because I had to look it up myself. The telephone, believe it or not, was invented March 10th of 1876. And the rumor is not true. I know you've heard the rumor. I know you've heard the rumor. I'm going to dispel the rumor. There is a rumor that says that the first words that Graham Bell said to his assistant Tom Watson, "Can you hear me now?" is not true.
Not true.
Not true. What he did say was, "Mr. Watson, come here. I want to see you." So here's a good question. What word would you have said first? If you were the first inventor, what would you have said? You pick up the phone and the other guy answers it. What would you have said?
Eureka! It worked.
Probably so. Yeah, I probably would have said that myself. Eureka!
It worked.
Works. Okay. So the telephone. Let's see how the telephone could have changed the world. How and what impact it would have on society. What do you think?
Oh, it made you could call someone. You can actually hear their voice.
Uh-huh.
You could be far away from them, hopefully,
Yep.
and still communicate with them.
So
and you could actually understand each other.
yeah, but you're missing something that
What?
you referred to earlier. You see, when you wrote letters, you had to send a letter, wait 2-3 weeks for an answer.
It was an instant thing.
Instant communication.
Instant communication.
Almost like, you remember way back when AOL instant messaging? Right?
Yep.
So it's the exact same thing in the telephone.
Wow.
The other thing the telephone allowed you to do was to project emotion and to hear emotion from the other person. Now, it's very nice on Valentine's Day, on birthdays, and on other festive occasions like anniversaries to write down, "I love you." It's very nice. You put a picture of a heart. That's great. Wonderful. But isn't it better to be on the phone and say, "I love you. I love you. I love you. I love you." I mean, there's so many different ways to say
So
it.
many different ways.
And then, as with anything else, so the telephone allowed you to do what? Express emotions and get instant communication. But it might have been a little bit too early. And that's where the telegraph came from. You see, the difference is between the telephone and the telegraph, which is really odd. In the telephone, it could be at somebody's house, right? The telegraph, did you ever see where people had their own telegraph station in their house?
No.
No.
You had to
What did
go-
they have to do?
You have to go to the post office or something.
To the telegraph
To
office.
the telegraph office.
Right.
Right.
And by the way, wasn't that the time of the time where America was expanding out to the west?
Yeah.
Right? So how did you communicate in those days? I don't think I ever remember any of the outlaws or marshals calling up another marshal in another town and saying, "Hey, what's the latest in the who's wanted report?" No, they actually telegraphed. So even though the telephone was invented earlier, the telegraph was there. So what did the telegraph allow somebody to do?
I don't know. Reply right away. Read it. See the
Right.
read it. See
Read
the
it.
written word.
See the written word. But it even goes beyond that. What is the one thing the telephone couldn't do in those days? It didn't record the conversation.
Oh, so they would have proof.
They would have proof.
They would have proof of
I
the written word. Black
Bet you
and
never
white.
thought of that.
Yeah. they
Bet
have
you never
proof.
thought of that. So the more you had the communications, the more that you could expand the horizons in life.
Look, you said this. Read it.
Yeah. So let me pause for a moment and ask her, how are we doing so far? Is
But
this
you're very interesting.
right? And you
Yeah.
can see how all these communications have really changed Earth. But wait, there's
More.
lots more that you actually would not believe. So now we've got the telephone, now we've got the telegraph, but once again, watch this. Every one of those communications is normally singular. Meaning, how many people do you reach when you have a telephone?
The other person.
Other person. How many people do you reach unless you had a party call? How many people can you reach when you had the telegraph?
One.
So
Well, that's not true. You can send the telegraph to one person who can show it to other people.
Yep. So what's another way to go ahead and really expand on the way you communicate with people? What's another way to do that?
All right, so we got the telephone, the telegraph.
Yeah. Yep.
now
There's
we
one
got,
more way. Come on, there's one more way.
I don't know, get on TV and wait.
No TV. How do you reach a mass audience?
You reach a mass audience.
Communication. Here we go. Ready?
Radio?
Before radio.
Before radio.
Newspapers and
Newspapers and
magazines.
magazines.
That's where you begin to have mass communications, right? Mass communications. And the mass communications are really important in communicating what? Communicating information and communicating themes, communicating stories, communicating public opinions. And influencing people. Right? So editorials and the slants, right wing, left wing, central wing, I'm not going to get all involved in that. So the newspapers and magazines came along, and that all of a sudden was able to do what? In written form, it was able to communicate to a mass audience. Now, what's one thing that a newspaper and magazine was able to do that these previous ways of communications were not able to do?
They reach many people.
In addition to that,
they expressed opinion.
we said that. A newspaper and magazine cannot survive without these.
Survive without the people.
Nope.
Not without reporters.
Nope.
What?
Oh, that's right. It probably. Oh, thank you for reminding me of that. So newspapers and magazines created a whole new profession.
Right.
Thank you. I didn't even think of that. Which was reporters
People
and
who
publishers
got the news, people who turned in something important.
and printers, and of course
Advertising.
That's it.
Advertising. Yes, advertising.
Very good. The whole advertising industry was born out of newspapers and magazines.
Supported the newspaper and the magazine. Without that, they couldn't produce it.
Right.
Right.
So I'm not going to go into the whole history of newspapers and magazines because that's a whole new thing. But newspapers and magazines were extremely important, as well as advertising. And you can't support and stuff without advertising. So all of a sudden, merchandising changed as a way of these types of communications.
Correct.
Right? And then, of course, people would buy full-page ads, half-page ads, and they would buy ads in magazines and newspapers that would be reflective of their lifestyle. Wow, what does that mean? Well, magazines were developed for art. We all know this. For hobbies, for news, for information,
Cooking.
for cooking, a whole bunch of stuff that we have today.
Fashion.
Fashion. And I know that there was there used to be a magazine. I never read it. Just the articles, Playboy, stuff like that. It was all different types of genres that you could communicate with, but you never thought of that. All right. So newspapers, magazines, they kept everybody up to date, and they really did a great job in communicating. Up to that point, everything was, we just now went from singular communication to mass communication. But that mass communication was simply in print. So what would come next?
The radio.
The radio. Very good. The radio. The first radio broadcast that ever was in the history of the world was made by a fellow by the name of Reginald Fessenden. I probably pronounced his name wrong. On Christmas Eve, 1906, when he beamed a Christmas concert to the astonished crews of the ships of the United Fruit Company out in the Atlantic and the Caribbean Sea. It is generally recognized that the first transmission was set up, however, in 1895. So it took time from 1895 up until 1906 to make it a commercialized business. And in 1895, on the that happened on the Isle of Wight. And then, of course, now you had radio. Wow, radio has evolved, certainly. What happened when you had radio? You now reach a mass audience by sound, by voice.
By voice.
And how do you think that impacted society?
I think people were glued to the radio at those times.
Yeah, they were glued to the radio.
For all different things, for the news, for sports, for whatever.
Yeah, and guess what? You know, on TV, which I'll cover a little bit later, on TV we have situation comedies, right? But guess what they had on the radio?
They had situation
comedies, right? That's where Jack Benny, George Burns, the Goldbergs, and a whole host of other shows actually started. It's absolutely amazing. And if I remember right, this I'll never understand, didn't one of the most famous ventriloquists start on radio? And I just couldn't figure out why. It'll come to me in a moment. I'll look it up, but it's there. So somebody actually had that. So the commercializing of radios,
which makes no sense.
I know, that's my point.
Which makes no sense.
I know, that's my point. Okay. So then you had talk radio, then you had music radio. Now watch what happens to this, right? So now all of a sudden you had music radio. What kind of an industry did that develop? The recording industry, more musicians. You didn't have to go to a concert hall. The concert hall came to you, no matter what genre of music there was at that particular time. And then eventually it was worldwide broadcasting. See, I'm glad you're still with me, and there's more coming, because you probably did not realize everything that is involved with communication that started way back when with just grunts, and how it impacts society. Now, radio was also used for purposes of propaganda.
Yes, it is.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah, and radio was used for the purposes of influencing the masses, which, by the way, is why it's called mass communication. And it was very popular. But, watch this. Where did you have to be in order to listen to the radio?
You had to be home.
You had to be home.
You had this big box, you had to be home.
Yep, and guess what?
Turn the knob.
And guess what? I mean,
what?
This is where it all comes together, and it recreated itself back in the 50s. But when you were home with your family.
Right.
Right?
So you all listened to the radio.
And we've seen pictures of that, right? We all listened to the radio. And, of course, that worked out pretty well until September 30th of 1929. What do you think happened September 30th of 1929?
Stock market crash?
No.
No.
Well, that's a good thought.
Some kind of Orson Welles
thing? That was October, I think, huh?
Some kind of Orson Welles thing?
No, Orson Welles was a radio thing from the end of the world, so that's what he thought.
What happened?
In September 30th, 1929, an experimental television service from Baird Television Company began broadcasting using the British Broadcasting Company's London transmitter. And in 1928, there was a very first TV station in the United States. It was from the General Electric facility in Schenectady, New York. And it was popularly known as WGY Television. So let's discuss for a moment how television changed society. I think we all know the answer to that. And how television changed the world. What do you think?
Oh, immensely. Television it has evolved. I mean, in the beginning, everything was black and white, and they went to color, and people actually stayed home and had their favorite shows, and it inspired people, it motivated people, it made people want to go out and buy things because they had advertisements, etc., etc.
And you had dramas. Now, I can also probably suggest, and I'm speeding up a little bit, but I'm going to go back for a moment, more people became lawyers as a result
of all the crime and law and order shows.
Yeah, Perry Mason particularly, right? Perry Mason, which is true, by the way. Perry Mason, and there was a TV show at the same time called The Defenders, and way back when.
So then nobody wanted to become a Superman from watching Superman?
Oh, yeah, Superman. Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh. Thank you very much. So you talk about Superman and all the Superman lunchboxes and costumes. All of this created a whole new industry. So what does this really turn out to be now? All of a sudden, you combined visual with auditory, because you could see both on the television. Now, she's right, as you know. We only had 3 TV stations at the time: CBS, ABC, NBC. And you didn't have a lot to select from.
And they weren't on all day.
And that's right, they weren't on, thank you very much, they weren't on all day. They actually ended at 12 o'clock. And yet,
and you would get the bars.
the horizontal bars, and oh my gosh, there was no remote control. How could we live without
Get
that?
up, change the
Change
channel.
up, change the channel, fix the horizontal bars, and what about the antennas?
The
Right,
antenna.
the movies, right.
The rabbit ears.
So television changed society because something else really occurred as a result of television, and that's the evening news. All of a sudden, when you remember how you used to get the news, and you know what I forgot to talk about? Oh my gosh. You know what I forgot?
What?
Wow, movie pictures.
Movie pictures.
Movie pictures, right?
Moving pictures.
Yeah, moving pictures. How can I forget that? That was another way to communicate stories.
Right.
Stories were communicated as a result of that. People
And then
went
in the
to
beginning,
theaters.
but in the beginning they were silent film. People did not talk.
Right.
So there was a lot of gestures, and even though you could see it visually, there was a lot of gestures, and then they evolved into talking shows.
And then they involved in the talking shows, right? Remember the very first one? That was, oh, come on. The Jazz Singer. The Jazz Singer being the very first talking movie.
Really?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Oh, yeah, absolutely. The Jazz Singer being the very first talking movie. I should have done that before TV, so I apologize. So that changed the world. Why? Because, wow, and now couples had something else to do for dates, right? And then that's how you got your news, remember? You got your news through the news part. And do you remember those days you could spend all day at the theater?
Right, and they gave away prizes, and they had raffles, and all kinds of stuff.
Yep.
You could because there was more than one movie.
Yeah, you had 2 movies, you had cartoons, and you had the newsreel. But you know what else you had that I think all of us probably forgot about? At least they were there when I was a kid. Remember who else was at the movies? The matrons.
Oh, they walked up and down the aisle with the flashlight. Looking.
Remember that? Yeah. Exactly right. Remember they're all dressed up in white, right? And what was their sole responsibility?
To make sure you weren't doing anything wrong.
Yeah, and we can talk.
Yeah.
Make sure you were making out with the guy or girl next to you. Make sure that your hands were not where they were supposed where it's supposed to be, not where they were not supposed to be. All of that is part of the whole communication involvement that I don't think we realized. All right, then we got back to TV. So what does that mean? In order to get your stories and your movies and your history, you had to go to the theater. Now TV brought it home to you. That's a transition that I want to make. And then, of course, that expanded. And a whole new society developed from that. And then what came after TV in terms of mass communication on August 6, 1991? What came after that? What do you think?
Go with it.
Oh, come on.
I can't think.
We can't live without it. It's unbelievable.
The portable telephone?
The internet.
The internet. 1991, huh?
The internet.
The superhighway.
On August 6, 1991, the World Wide Web went live to the world. There was no fanfare in the global press, in fact. Most people around the world didn't even know what the internet was. So here's what the...
Okay.
It's true.
Yes, I know, but I'm trying to think. When I got my first computer, that was around that same time.
No, we were one of the holdouts for computers. We were
Okay.
just talking about that today.
Okay.
Because I didn't understand the internet way back when. I thought the computer was a glorified typewriter. Remember those typewriters? And anyway.
And now
I'm a high tech today, but that's not about me. So, which I'm going to get to. Which I'm going to get to a little bit later. So now we had the internet. So on the internet, wow, we could get all the information. That changed society because all of a sudden, after it evolved, it was known as, the information superhighway. Now, how did that change? When was the last time anybody ever knocked on your door?
with an encyclopedia.
Very good.
No, gone.
Gone, an encyclopedia.
The World Book of Knowledge.
Yeah, but the internet probably began to destroy education. The internet The internet probably destroyed a whole lot of society. Why? Because when people were watching television, they did it as a family. Everybody started going to the internet on their own. Why did it prevent education, and still does? Because all of a sudden video games came out, both on the internet and on television. You remember the Atari and and some of the first ones, right? Pac-Man. So that was a way to communicate games and challenges. You no longer had to go to the ballpark or go outside and play, because all of a sudden, what happened? The games came to you. And people became fixated on that. There's so much more to this to this communication, I was about to say Facebook, than we would believe. So as a result of the computer, what came next? Google. What came after that? Facebook. Or before that, I should say, I forget which one came first. YouTube. YouTube came first. All of a sudden, man, you could see people from around the world doing these unbelievable things, and you would be fixated and focused on that. Then became Facebook, where you can talk to billions of people around the world. And the list goes on and on and on. And can you imagine the cave people having all of that?
The what?
Cave people, where I'm starting from in the beginning.
No.
All these communications, and, so much I'm forgetting. How about the cell phone? You all remember the first cell phone? When we wanted a phone call or to make a phone call, what did we have to do? You had to go to a phone booth. You had to be home. You had to be there to get the call. Then the cell phone came out. We talked about this a couple of tapes ago. I'm not going to get right back into it. Now, what's on your cell phone? You got it. The internet, TV, the whole 9 yards. Methods of communication. Then the iPad came out, right? Everything you wanted to do on one pad, all you had to do was
small thing.
All you had to do was plop out $500, and then you could have that, right? It was the whole world of communications is crazy, and it's changing society. This one here, let me tell you something about this one here. She loves to read, but I can't remember the last time I bought her a book.
Well, you never bought me a book. I bought my own book.
All right, fine.
Okay.
You're right. So what do you do now?
Now it goes on my iPad. I graduated from holding a actual book, which I love to do, and it did take me some time. But now all my books are on my iPad in a book, kind of like my own library, so I can just read as I go, and it's fantastic. I don't have to have a book.
Right.
I have a book.
You're right. Exactly right. Exactly right. And then something else I want to throw in. Now they've got everything on watches. Yes. Do you think this is a plain watch that just tells the time? No, no, no. This is my telephone. This is my internet. This is my email. This is my text messages. This is my heart rate. This is my walking steps.
How many steps he walked?
How many steps I walked, etc., etc. And now, too, talk about communications. I know I'm overloading you with information, but this is all that's there. You wouldn't have believed it when you started out on this tape a few minutes ago. So then, on your camera, guess what else you have? Pardon me, on your cell phone. You have cameras. And movie cameras, the whole 9 yards. And you know what? Remember the old days? You go to somebody's house and they had all their 8mm movies or their slideshows of their trip down the block. And you had to sit there all day and watch this silly thing. I still, by the way, you know this, I still have my slides. She got mad at me. Sometimes. Why we moved, okay? Every time we move, I take slides with me that I haven't watched. I don't even have a slide projector. I don't even have a screen. And I still have my old slides. I don't know. It's crazy. Anyway, there's one thing that's missing on communications, among some others.
What is that?
So you know what? We're all talking about earthly communications. How about interplanetary communications? Can you ever imagine? I mean, it's reality today. When we were kids, we imagined it. Now, right now, on the planet Mars, they make a big deal out of this, as it should. There's a helicopter, a little stupid little helicopter. They push a button here on Earth, and they're able to communicate with that helicopter there, and they can see the helicopter fly from the cameras that are in the Mars rover, or whatever they call it thing. I forget what, Inquisitive, Inquirer, I don't know what it is. But they still have it there. These whole things of communications are changing. So, what do you think is next? How else can we communicate?
I don't know. I don't. Maybe they'll get rid of. Maybe they'll get rid of phones and everything else, and you have a chip in your arm, and you. Just,
Oh, they have that, by the way. Oh,
right, but
spies
maybe you
have
won't
that.
even have to carry any of these gadgets. You just go like this.
Oh my gosh! You know what?
What?
Look at here. Look at here. You see these? You see these?
Yeah.
Yep. You know what's
Those
in
are
here?
his nerdy glasses.
Those are
to
my
put the phone-
nerdy glasses. Okay, but why am I wearing nerdy glasses? This is crazy. You see here, right here, is my telephone. If you see me walking around, hey, hello, how are you? Everything, I love you. I think I just love you. I adore you. You know, I'm talking to her, and you might think, well,
It better be.
It better be, right? Oh, something else in communications. Oh my God, the iPod. You remember you had to be home for the radio and for your music, or in your car. You had to be somewhere stationary.
It's gone already.
Well, I know, but they had to change the whole thing.
Right.
Oh, I am out of breath talking about all the changes in communication. So let's get into something basic. Is that good for us? What do you think?
Well, it is, because look at the year we just came off of. If we didn't have these inventions, we wouldn't have been able to communicate with each other.
I forgot Zoom too.
Yeah, Zoom. We wouldn't have been able to communicate.
Oh my God, I forgot Zoom or Skype.
Right, Skype.
Skype and Zoom.
But if we came off a year of pandemic, of being locked down, we would not have been able to communicate with each other.
Yeah, it would have been a major disaster and a major problem.
So it had its downfalls, but I think it's good for us.
But are we using very good. Are we using communications to better society, or is communications being used to worsen society, or is that a question not worth asking?
It's a question that has no correct answer.
How come?
It just doesn't, because it depends on the communication you're looking at. It doesn't have a set answer.
See, I'm going to disagree with you.
Okay, please do.
And I'm going to say that communications has isolated society.
Well, because you can do so much on your own now, and not have to because with Zoom you can actually do this and not meet people in person.
Yeah. And not only that, as I talked about earlier, teenagers are hooked to communication technology. Now, you might argue with me and say, well, video games are not communication technology. Fact of the matter, they are, because they're communicating games to you that you can just sit there and do whatever you want to on your own. You don't have to be with family. You don't have to be with society. I saw something just a moment ago on Facebook where somebody reflected on the way society was 50 years ago. And what did people do? What did you do when it was time out to play? You went outside to play. I don't think that word has ever been used again, except for playground.
Yeah.
Where people,
Mother used to say, "Go out and play."
Yeah,
go out. Find your friend. Go play.
Exactly, and you did, right? And you had social skills. I think a lot of the communications today have isolated us, and we've lost the attachment with society. And I'm also going to say this: I think society is as fractured as it is, and will get worse, because we have become too individualized. And I think a lot of the communications that we are now doing, even though we're reaching the masses are reaching us. We get instant responses. We can impact and influence advertising and products and the whole 9 yards. We no longer do it as a group. We no longer do it as a society. We no longer do it as a family unit. And that is what the core of the times were. And I can almost guarantee you that if you go back to the society the way it was prior to all these communication tools, I don't think there was a lot of drug abuse. I don't think there was a lot of violent crimes. There were wars, and many of them were based on religious wars. But I don't think that there was as much of a diverse society. And I'm not just talking about the United States, mind you. I'm talking about the entire world.
So you're saying that all this progress of invention have led to a dysfunctional society?
I believe I could make a case for that. What do you think? I believe I could make a case for that. What do you think?
Well, society is dysfunctional.
Yeah.
And we did not have some of these problems years ago. I don't know if we can connect it to the progress in communication. I don't know if that's fair to say that.
Let me explain to you why. So let's assume, for example, I have an idea. Okay, I have a position. Now, what is the first thing I'm going to try and do with my idea or position? I'm going to try and influence others. In the old days, what did I have to do? I had to stand on a soapbox. Remember that? I had to stand on a soapbox in Central Park or somewhere, and hopefully somebody would listen to me and get my idea out. Or I would have to make a sign with a placard and run around and whatever my cause was. You know what I need to do today? I can put up a YouTube video. I can put up a Facebook video. I can put an ad in the newspaper to influence society. Now, some of my changes might be good. I understand that. But are they normally? I don't think so. And I think because of all this availability for mass communications, it works. How can I prove that? I can prove that very simply. Ready for this? Hey, watch this. Let's take the country of Russia. Okay? The country of Russia used to be known before it fell apart as the Iron Curtain. Right? And what was the Iron Curtain? Nobody could communicate in and nobody could communicate out. Okay? And they did not want their citizens to be influenced by Radio Free America.
Right.
Remember that? Radio Free America? They didn't want any of that stuff. They isolated their country and they had full power and control of all its citizens. And what happened after that? Wow, the whole thing changed, right? They dropped the Iron Curtain and there was dissension. There actually was some revolutions in Russia. And that is because people had an idea, they were able to get in and out and hit the mass and hit the communications. That's why censorship is such a big thing. Because
but Russia today still has censorship, even though it's a little bit more lax than it used to be. But it still censors everything about that.
Right.
That their citizens do.
But here's a more recent example of how communications is used not to impact society, which means communications can impact society. Ready for this? North Korea. North Korea is an isolated country. You can hardly get any messages in, hardly get any messages out. Why? They don't want the North Korean citizens exposed to democracy. They want to control the message. They control the message through their own internal system of mass communications. And the same thing with Burma, if I remember correctly, when they had the revolution. Just recently, they cut the whole thing out. So I don't think society is utilizing the communication process for the benefit of the all and for the benefit of the good. But that drives us back to one other question. We started with the Stone Age, the smoke signals, and the Stone Age with the grunting.
The grunt. We started
grunts.
with the grunt.
Are we better off today or not?
We are better off today.
And make your case.
We're better off today. We have progress. It isn't, I think, as I said, society is dysfunctional and needs to be fixed. But I don't really think, we have this progress. I don't think we can blame it entirely on the communication. I think because of maybe progress, there's a lot more stress and for other things, outside interferences that happen. Mm-hmm. So we are better off
and
with all the progress.
Yeah, and I'm going to go with her for just a moment, and here's why. Without the communications that we have today, Carol and I would not be talking to you.
That's correct.
Without the communications that we have today, you would not be listening to Carol and I. So we really hope that by listening to us and by allowing us to share the history and thoughts of communications, hopefully it gave you a little bit more perspective as to the evolution of history, that communications really have changed from individual to mass, from smoke signals to instantaneous, and how the progression is. And what do you think it might be coming next? I really think one day, just like the movie Telepathic, I think is going to be coming up, if it's not already there, and we don't know about it. And I also think the Beam Me Up, Scotty. I think one day we'll be there when, if you want to go someplace, somehow push a button.
Beam me up, Scotty.
Beam me up. I truly believe, I don't know when that will be, I truly believe that will happen. So, from the Broadcasting Central Network of Andy Greenberg's and Carol Greenberg's Broadcasting Center, we hope you enjoyed this time we spent together. We look forward to doing it again and sharing some delightful, educational, thought-provoking insights with you.
And when we're finished, you might see the bars. We'll be done with the TV, the bars.
Huh?
It's okay.
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 Not quite. When I see you, and you, maybe you can help me understand what she just said. That one is way above my head. Let me rephrase. That one just didn't communicate with me. All right. We'll see you guys. Take care. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.